Hello, my name is Jeanette Harper, and the purpose of this video is to discuss Pakistan's top intelligence organization, the Inter-Services Intelligence, or more commonly known as the ISI, and consider the way it, along with Pakistan's regime, officially deals with the accusation that the country overtly supports all form of terrorism. What I want to do here is to narrow in on the subject of Pakistan's involvement, support, and/or disregard for terrorism, and how the country defends itself to the international community in light of these allegations. Does Pakistan support terrorism? Does the evidence prove that Pakistan's ISI does indeed fight terrorism as it claims? Or does it verify that the country actually supports terrorism? This isn't such an easy question to answer because it does appear that ISI has in fact done quite a bit to counter terrorism. For example, prior to 2004, the ISI arrested half a dozen senior leaders of al-Qaeda, and at that time appeared to still be playing an important role in the war on terror. In 2002, ISI agents were quick to seize suspected killers of U.S. journalist Daniel Pearl. Also in 2002, more than 60 al-Qaeda operatives were arrested in Faisalabad. Pakistani security forces captured one of Osama bin Laden's chief lieutenants, Abu Zubaydah, along with 19 other al-Qaeda operatives in the eastern Pakistani city of Faisalabad. The ISI arrested September 11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and another key al-Qaeda operative, Mohammed Ahmed al-Hawsawi, while they slept. Going further, the ISI and the Pakistani military have worked effectively with the United States to continue pursuing the remnants of al-Qaeda, and following 9/11, Pakistan stationed 80,000 troops in the troubled province of Waziristan near the Afghan border in order to help break the back of the al-Qaeda network. Historically, Pakistan has shown the international community its willingness to cooperate. They worked with the CIA to train 100,000 plus mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. They destroyed KGB interests in Central Asia. They played a role in the Cold War that led to the independence of 15 Central Asian states from the USSR. They were partially responsible for the coming down of the Berlin Wall in the aftermath of the fall of the USSR in Afghanistan. They foiled an Israeli-Indian attack on Kahuta nuclear research centers, and they cooperated with NATO in Bosnia and Kosovo. And then on the other hand, there is plenty of circumstantial evidence to suggest that Pakistan does in fact support terrorism. Despite the fact that they are thought to have approximately 10,000 agents worldwide, none of its personnel have ever been caught on camera. This makes it difficult to prove conclusively that they have been involved in terrorist attacks. However, Indian officials implicated the ISI for the November 2008 terrorist attacks on Mumbai that killed nearly 200 people. India's foreign ministry said the ISI had links to the planners of the attacks. Even though Islamabad denies allegations of any official involvement, it did acknowledge in 2009 that the attack was launched and partly planned from Pakistan. Then there's the issue of the Taliban and Pakistan's attitude toward Osama bin Laden. After the U.S.-led invasion toppled the regime, the Taliban regrouped in Pakistan, where its central leadership led an insurgency against the Western-backed government in Kabul. In addition to the suspicion that Pakistan was continuing to provide the Taliban militants sanctuary in the country's western tribal areas, Osama bin Laden was found hiding out in a Pakistani military town not far from Islamabad. This raised new questions over Army and ISI support for the al-Qaeda leader and the legitimacy of their counterterrorism efforts. Leon Panetta, director of the CIA at the time, expressed his frustration and anger over Pakistan's claimed ignorance over bin Laden's whereabouts. He found it incredulous that the Pakistani military and the ISI were unaware that bin Laden was holed up in a suspicious million-dollar mansion. He, along with many others, had no doubt that Pakistani intelligence was either involved or totally incompetent, and concluded that neither was acceptable. It is also generally unacceptable that Pakistan refuses to this day to label bin Laden a terrorist. Now, although there was a crackdown on terrorist groups, it appears to have been done quite selectively And when it comes to the Taliban, the Pakistan military has largely ignored their fighters on their soil. It seems that only the terrorist groups that the ISI has no influence over are the ones that get targeted, and they seem to only tighten pressure on groups whose objectives are out of sync with the military's perception of Pakistan's national interest. Then there is the subject of suicide bombers trained by the Taliban and how the ISI may be involved. In her film, Children of the Taliban, Sharmeen Chinoy shows how the Taliban recruits children from poor families, ships them hundreds of miles away from their families, gives them months of military training, forces them to read the Quran 8 hours a day, feeds them pure propaganda all day long, denies them access to any other forms of information, beats and practically starves them so they hate the world in which they live, gives them hope that martyrdom for Islam is glorious, and teaches them how to do a suicide bombing. The world has already experienced the impact suicide bombings have from bombers that were most likely trained in Pakistan. Pakistan itself, Afghanistan, India, the UK, and the United States have all been victimized. It is safe to say that if this threat is left unchecked, there will be more devastating consequences like these for both American and global society. There is another set of viewpoints that deserve further consideration here. For one, ISI may not even define what they've done in the past as terrorism. It may be that the ISI has just lost control of militant groups. It also appears that there are divisions within the ISI that work against each other, and they may even be working against the government's control while pursuing its own foreign policy. If the ISI does indeed have a staff of 10,000, it's easy to see how rogue elements could exist within its framework. Maybe none of this has anything to do with murdering innocents for the heck of it. Many ISI agents do have ethnic and cultural ties to Afghan insurgents and just naturally sympathize with them. These agents realize they cannot follow a policy contradictory to that of the Army, which is directly involved in counterterrorism operations in the area. So, what is the policy of the United States on Pakistan? The United States has been a major player in Pakistan for more than 60 years and has been providing economic assistance along with military aid to the tune of $67 billion between the years 1951 and 2011 to the country since shortly after its creation in 1947. Following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were formed as resistance movements with the intention to drive Soviet troops out of Afghanistan. The United States, along with Saudi Arabia, was in full support of these mujahideen factions and provided them with substantial financial aid. As a result, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda became very strong, and many credit their success of the 9/11 attacks and their rise to becoming the biggest threat for global peace on the support they received. After 9/11, the U.S. declared a war on terror and swiftly changed their policies on terrorism. Since 9/11, U.S. policy in regards to Pakistan has mainly been to dismantle the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations, use drone strikes on suspected terrorists in Pakistan's tribal areas, and pursue engagement with Pakistan, including maintaining access for tracking global terrorists sheltering on its territory, encouraging Pakistan's leadership to pursue a moderate democratic path, and maintaining a degree of leverage with the military leadership to ensure that Pakistan's nuclear weapons remain safe and secure and out of the hands of extremists. So how does Pakistan play a role in this policy, and what is the relationship it has with the United States? Since 9/11, Pakistan has, or at least appeared to have, cooperated with the United States in its war on terror and is expected to continue in the future. As I mentioned earlier, Pakistan has in fact done quite a bit to counter terrorism, only if selectively. I think the United States' policy of continually overlooking Pakistan's inaction against extremist groups on its territory will have long-term negative consequences for U.S. interests in the region, namely its plans to maintain sizable bases and a military presence in Afghanistan beyond 2014, and its interest in Central Asia because of its vast reserves of oil and natural gas, and will increase the chances for additional terrorist attacks on the U.S. homeland. Are there other countries that are concerned with the same threat? All Western countries are concerned with the threat of Islamic jihad, terrorism, and suicide bombings that stem from Pakistan and other countries with the same ideological beliefs. Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and India also top the list. Are there any countries that are not particularly concerned with this threat? Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Syria. They are on that list, along with North Korea and China. So what do the experts have to say? The experts believe that Pakistan is a threat, no matter what Pakistan says, and their actual intention is to continue utilizing terrorism as a tool in order to further its strategic ambitions in India and Afghanistan. They believe Pakistan is trying to secure its own perceived strategic interests at any cost and will continue to appease extremists and terrorist organizations in order to do so. They predict that Pakistan will continue to practice policies that endanger the integrity of the Pakistani state in order to ensure India does not become too powerful. The strength of this argument lies in the evidence that has been presented to support this belief, such as the testimonies of failed suicide bombers who assert that they were trained in Pakistan. However, what is weak about this argument is that Pakistan has a deep mistrust of the United States, and the reason they behave the way they do is because of the way they feel they have been mistreated. The experts say that Pakistan is not a threat because the country has done a lot to help combat terrorism and has shown the international community their willingness to cooperate on several different occasions. They say Pakistan doesn't really want to hurt anyone. After all, they argue, Pakistan is a sovereign state and is only doing what is in its own best interests. What does that entail? They insist that Pakistan has genuine desire to improve itself and enhance its international standing by focusing on its economic growth, searching for energy and water security, and building relations with Afghanistan, even if that means negotiating with the Taliban and any other terrorist organization, which I will remind you, they don't label all of them terrorists. The strength of this argument is, again, the evidence that supports Pakistan's assertion that it is interested in helping combat terrorism. However, where the argument is weak, and not to sound like a broken record, but is that it fails to take into account that Pakistan has only targeted specific terrorist organizations, the ones that are not in sync with their own interests while they support others. It is also difficult to trust Pakistan because they have, unfortunately, been caught lying and covering up their activities. It is also worth pointing out that Pakistan has not made domestic stability a priority at all. In fact, their obsession with India has been partly responsible for the country's descent into chaos. So, what do these intellectuals recommend? Some believe that it is best to simply cut Pakistan off. They believe that the United States has no business there, and, as an example, its drone strikes violate Pakistan's sovereignty. Others believe that cutting Pakistan off would ultimately be counterproductive, and that the United States should continue to engage Pakistan where possible. This would include continuing to hold Pakistan accountable for its dangerous policies and their consequences. Yet others believe the answer is to continue providing weapons systems and training in order to help Pakistan deal with terrorists and to try to divert them from their goal of dominating India. Another group believes that containment is the answer. However, the idea is containment of the threat rather than the country itself. This approach would include increasing pressure on Pakistani intelligence, military, and other entities that enable military proliferation or terrorism by applying sanctions to specific persons rather than agencies in general. So what is my personal view on how the United States should deal with Pakistan from now on? I believe the current policy of the United States in regard to dismantling the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations should remain, but the U.S. should approach Pakistan in a way that conveys its understanding that it is, unfortunately, a vulnerable state in an unstable region of the world, and that no matter what the United States wants, Pakistan must continue to pursue its own national interests. It already feels threatened by its traditional rival and neighbor, India, which is a lot bigger, has a stronger military, and a more efficient economy. It is afraid that if it loses control over Afghanistan, other regional powers will fill the void, and they may end up being encircled by their adversaries. I can hardly blame them for feeling this way, considering the way the U.S. handled things in Afghanistan and Iraq. Pakistan is also afraid that the Pashtun tribe, the strongest tribe in the region that straddles the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, will switch loyalties from Pakistan to Afghanistan. If that were to happen, Afghanistan would easily pose a threat to Pakistan's territorial integrity. The United States could do a much better job of reassuring Pakistan that its concerns are legitimate, that once it either tires of or completes its nation-building business, it will not withdraw, leaving the country to deal with Afghanistan alone, and to stop pressuring and funding it to conduct military operations along the Afghan border, which Pakistan does not particularly enjoy. Plus, it is important for the United States to understand that even though it contradicts their interests, encouraging radical Islam is an important part of Pakistan's strategy to continue pursuing their own interests. This is most likely the reason Pakistan continues to deny their involvement and support of terrorist organizations in the region. Until Pakistan feels secure that the balance of power will not unfairly shift in Afghanistan's favor, they will most likely continue to behave in this way. So what should the United States do in order to make them feel this way? As I said earlier, the answer is to assure both Pakistani's government and the Pakistani people that the U.S. will remain engaged there diplomatically, financially, and militarily by maintaining a robust residual presence in Afghanistan, at least until the situation is stable. This would show Pakistan that the United States is committed to finishing the job they started, and if the U.S. were successful in this endeavor, Pakistan might realize that the extremist organizations in the region don't offer as much security as Pakistanis think they do. They may even offering them their support. So how would the United States go about getting Pakistan to play a constructive instead of destabilizing role in Afghanistan and the region? I'm convinced that a new policy towards India is the key. Pakistanis get the impression that the United States value Indian lives and interests over theirs. When there are terrorist attacks against India, the United States is quite vocal. However, when there are Pakistani losses, they don't make the same kind of noise. This must change if Pakistan is to feel more secure in their relationship with the West. Also, in order to foster constructive dialogue between India and Pakistan, the United States should offer its support but refrain from acting as a mediator. The U.S. should remain firm that it seeks to help both Pakistan and India prevent global terrorists from setting up new safe havens in Afghanistan. So what should be done about the billions of dollars in U.S. aid? I think it would be best if the United States should temporarily halt assistance in order to look for a different way to do business. Clearly, the way it is being done now is not looked upon favorably by either country. This break would give the United States a chance to evaluate the problems with the old system and put together a new one. Another policy that needs to be changed is one where the United States has in regards to imposing extremely high import taxes. If the U.S. would consider lowering these tariffs, it would help attract investment and spur economic growth in Pakistan. This would go a long way in helping establish a more trusting relationship between Pakistanis and the United States. So what about the war on terror? As mentioned previously, Pakistan has cracked down on some terrorist groups, but appears to have done so selectively, especially when it comes to the Taliban. The reason for this may be because Pakistan has not yet worked out a strategy that both protects its regional interests while simultaneously withdrawing support for terrorist activities and ideology. What the United States must do is impress upon Pakistan that the bigger threat to their stability would be to lose credibility with the international community for continuing policies that encourage terrorism and endanger the safety of civilized nations. If the United States is successful in their approach, Pakistan may perhaps utilize the resources they have to force the Taliban to compromise in Afghanistan rather than continue to embolden them. If the United States really wants to push Pakistan to reject all forms of terrorism, it must place strict conditions on any further military aid and must change the language from assisting the United States to fight its war on terror to specifically address that it expects the country to crack down on specific extremist groups, including the Taliban and the Haqqani network. U.S. senators from both sides have already expressed frustration and, in 2012, had a rare moment of bipartisanship in regards to Pakistan. Even though, in this particular case, it was about the treatment of one individual, they made it clear that they were all disenchanted with Pakistan's government, military, and intelligence services actions throughout the war in Afghanistan. They agreed that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is currently arranged as dysfunctional and undermining U.S. national security interests. This is the first step in correcting the impression the United States has given that it has gotten soft in regards to Pakistan being in support of U.S. enemies. It is simply not in the best interest of the U.S. to remain divided on this issue. Last but not least, I think it is imperative that the United States pushes to promote deeper civil society engagement between Americans and Pakistanis by supporting initiatives in the fields of media, the arts, education, business, and agricultural development. One such initiative is the U.S.-Pakistan Leadership Forum, which bring together American private sector leaders and Pakistanis that are working hard and risking their lives to bring about democracy and good governance for the people of Pakistan. This concludes my presentation. Have a good day.